Welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Howdy, everybody. I'm here with my lovely wife, April. April, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you.
Now, you might be wondering why we're not in the same shot. It's not that we don't like each other. She's at the other side of the house because it's a little bit easier to capture on the video side of things. So we're going to talk to you guys today about a topic that's not controversial at all. It is entitled, What Mass Adoption of the Breast Pump is Doing to Motherhood. So you guys come to us because we talk about very strange things that, and we asked very surprising questions. I think that people are like, what? There can't possibly be anything wrong with the breast pump. I mean, that just brought freedom and joy and flexibility to the lives of mothers everywhere. Right, April?
Well,
I can tell you guys, that's not how she's going to react.
I might have a thing or two to say about that.
She might have a bone to pick with that perspective. Okay. So we were having this conversation, and the way that our relationship often works in these kinds of topics is we will be having a conversation about something, and April will have like a sudden negative reaction, like a little seizure of concern. And this concern, I'm always very puzzled, what's going on, babe? What's wrong with this? And so then she starts to talk, and this is where I get all my material, by the way, guys. I just kind of see April's expression on her face and go, "Oh, I should write an essay about that." Something's really weird.
I'm an expressive person.
Yes. Yeah. She doesn't hide anything. It's she has zero control. As her counselor says, impulse control over your face. Yeah.
Right. I would say I have zero. I would say I'm getting better.
Yeah. Well, we like it. I mean, it's I just told all the kids, I'm just embrace it. Your mom's going to react to things, and it's always very instructive. What's that?
There's usually a reason.
Yes. Yeah. That's always the fun. Then we go on the treasure hunt for the reason, the deep reason for why she thinks this. Okay. So I did that. We dove into this topic a couple of months ago, and we were trying to figure out a rhythm where we can get April more on my podcast, because I'd love to have these conversations more together. So we're going to try this today, and hopefully this will be the first of many. But I'll read to you guys some of the things that I heard as she was talking about it, and some things that I started thinking about, and then we'll kind of dive into this topic a little bit and just see where this goes. But I just think we need to have this kind of conversation. And this is really about technology and its impact on family. This is sort of but we're going to kind of get there through this little essay, What Mass Adoption of the Breast Pump is Doing to Motherhood. So this is on my Substack. It says, technologies have given us so many blessings, they are hard to even begin to quantify. Sociologists suggest that technology has transformed society so dramatically that our great-great-grandparents' day-to-day life had more in common with Abraham than with our modern lifestyle today. But one of the great challenges of technology is that we pay marketers to sell us on their benefits while hiding their negative effects. As a rule, we must remember that every technology both giveth and taketh away. We often don't even know what has been taken away until a technology has been so fully adopted that the loss, even if we decided at that point that it's too high, seems impossible to reverse. Technologies carry with them their own vision of the world. Every technology is like an embodied idea that is creating a future world. Kevin Kelly, co-founder of Wired magazine, wrote a book called What Technology Wants, as a warning to unsuspecting humans that technology is never as simple as a neutral tool. The human plus technology dyad too often will shape the future in directions that serve the ideal world of that technology, bringing the human along as a subservient junior partner. All of this can seem like philosophical abstraction until we force the conversation to center around specific technologies and how they are shaping our brave new world. So today, we want to consider together a technology that has given freedom to millions of women as it went from an expensive hospital appliance used in specific instances to something mass-produced that today every new mother is expected to purchase and use daily. And that technology is the breast pump. We are particularly interested in the way technologies can subtly redefine the family and the roles within the home. And now that this device is used by the majority of mothers, it's worthwhile taking a step back and acknowledging both what has been gained and what has been lost. So some questions we can talk about today are, what are some of the advantages of the breast pump? Because there definitely are those. What hidden forces have been at work making this technology so commonly used? What might overuse of this technology look like? What does this technology want? Like, what world is it designed to create if it gains dominance? How has this technology impacted the role and identity of mothers or fathers or babies? What might a world look like were we to reduce its use back to occasions when it's only medically necessary? So those are things in those topics we can talk about. But yeah, I wanted to this kind of by way of stirring you back up, April, and kind of reminding you what we talked about. And curious what are you thinking about as you approach this topic?
Well, I think that a lot of modern technologies, sometimes we just embrace them without considering the cost, without wondering what life will be like if we do embrace this. And so I am a little on the side of trying to predict a little bit of these things and then or just trying to ask, is this thing, whatever the thing is, in violation of God's original design somehow?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the breast pump in particular feels like a violation of God's original design.
Really?
And what's that?
I said, really?
Yeah. Yes. And so that's kind of where we can focus this conversation, because I know there are many technologies and we don't need to go into all of those, but we're specifically talking about, breast pump, and with the obvious understanding that there are times that this is an exception,
Right.
I'm talking about in general, like you said in your essay about, every new mom has a breast pump on her registry. What's up with that? Yeah. So I had my first child in 1999. So at that point in time, I didn't know many people who were using the breast pump. And like a few years even into that, like maybe 4 or 5 years past that, when I was meeting other new moms who were becoming moms for the first time, if they did have a breast pump, it was because they were working and they were gonna, they still wanted their kid to have breast milk, but they were not the one to give them. They were going to take it through a bottle and they weren't going to be the ones to give it. And so all of that was a very foreign idea to me. And so that's kind of where I am on the timeline of this technology in my little world. So I feel like the God's original design, he made our bodies so clearly to give sustenance to a brand new infant. So you picture this brand new infant coming out of the womb and its immediate need for sustenance. And the only place they can get that sustenance, if you're picturing like, the year 1502 or something like that, is from the mother's breasts. And if something tragically were to happen to the mother were to die in childbirth, or maybe she's too weak or she has no supply or something like that, then they would have had to scramble for synthetic versions of, cow's milk, goat's milk, whatever they could find
Wet
to
nurse.
a wet nurse, that kind of thing. So obviously there are other ways that they've had to, deal with this in the past and throughout the centuries. But when you just are talking about your everyday average situation where it's given us another reason to not embrace motherhood to its fullest, and another way to for us to not really enter in to what motherhood is. And if you really break it down, the way I see it is that the first 6 months of a baby's life is when they're typically only taking in milk. At around 6 months or so is when you might start introducing baby cereal or baby food, that kind of thing. It's really, so for the first 6 months of their life, when they are only taking in milk, that's kind of what I'm.
Okay. Yeah. During that period. So one of the things you said that kind of strikes me is that this technology has offered a choice to women that throughout all of history, they've never had to make. Right. So it starts kind of with that, like
Yes.
So you now have a choice. Up to that point, there was no choice. And so what we assume as a culture is it's always better to be given a choice. I mean, it's, what's better than 5 different kinds of cereals, 5,000 different kinds of cereals. And a lot of people are saying today that this intuition that we have in the West, that more choice is always good, is really breaking down in every single area. We find that more choices really can cause a lot of problems, especially because it requires a lot of wisdom. You got a young mom who's now be giving a choice, and you're thinking, great, more freedom, more choice, always better, 100% of the time. And there's 2 problems with that we're already sort of trying to explore here. One is that giving that choice to a woman can create a pathway that's actually going to lead to problems for her, because it requires a lot of wisdom to make that choice. And you're always, in this case, talking about a young mom, oftentimes who's never even had a child before, hasn't thought about this deeply, especially if they're not connected to their mother or any kind of root structure. So that's huge. But then the second thing is that there's also a subtle suggestion being made by the technology itself that maybe the connection between sustenance and the mother isn't innate, that there's actually, it's just an option. Like we're suddenly saying that's one of many options. And another thing that we're obsessed with the culture is to never suggest that there's a better option. I mean, that is basically blasphemy, right, to our culture. How dare you suggest there's a better option when there are 2 options? It's everyone's individual choice. But again, it's really denying the fact that the technology itself is suggesting something about that. And so you're sort of pushing back as a mother and almost grandmother. And I know this kind of got stirred up a little bit because Kelsey was wrestling with this, and we're going to have, these conversations. We have 4 daughters, and so I think you kind of maybe felt a little bit of a visceral reaction to the fact that, okay, every single one of my daughters is going to be told this is a default position, put this on your registry, figure out how to fit into your life. That wasn't something that existed even in the 1990s when the technology was definitely there. It wasn't as cheap or as accessible, but you could buy a breast pump back then in the late 90s, but it was just something that, was a lot less common. And so something happened in the last, 20 years to make it, very, very common.
Yes. Yeah. And, there's a couple of things that makes me think of. One is I've heard, not definitely not all women, but I have heard many women say to me, in the last few years, how they feel like they're not really like a nurturing person, so they kind of excuse some things away because they're just not really a nurturing person. Yeah. And so within motherhood, I'm talking about the topic of motherhood. They're just saying like, I'm not really that nurturing. So X, Y, and Z. So I feel like when we distance ourselves from the way God originally designed the nursing situation, we reject a possible solution to that thing. If you're
Yeah.
not typically a nurturing person, well, maybe
Wow.
the idea of breastfeeding your child and spending that time holding them and looking at them when you can do nothing else, it can feel very, inefficient or something like that. But you are creating a bond there, and you are the only one that gets to do it. And sometimes that's an overwhelming feeling, like, oh my gosh, I'm the only one that can do this. This is, this feels like such a weight, like such a responsibility. But sometimes it's like, yeah, you're the only one that can do it. And that's something really unique and very special. And that will open your heart up to the idea of nurturing this infant, this teeny tiny, helpless human. And I think we've shut ourselves off from the pathway forward towards becoming, more nurturing if we eliminate one of the very acts that God designed for us to become.
Yeah. Wow. To become nurturing. It's like it's almost like, when a mother breastfeeds her infant, she's nurturing at a 10 in that moment.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so no matter what her personality or wiring is, and this is like a lot like that conversation around like love being a verb versus maybe a description. It's something you do. Nurturing is something you do, now
Right.
you might struggle, but this is a role of a mother in a family. And part of what creates nurturing is embracing the radical dependence that an infant has on the mother. And I think that because there's a cultural, again, this is another optional thing. It's like you have an option to reject that, that role, to say, I'm not a nurturing person, so I'm going to like really back away from giving that to my child, from really, really participating in that nurturing act. And this sort of brings up, I think, I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole with all the elephants in the room with this topic. but another one that I think is inevitable, of course, that a lot of mothers I'm sure are thinking of is like, well, what about the working mother? Like, this is unfair. And I think that the framing that a lot of people are going to be instinctually thinking about this through is the framing of equality between men and women. So just like the birth control pill was framed in that way, and now it's being demonstrated that this was a disastrous kind of. I encourage you guys to read Louise Perry's book on the case against the sexual revolution. She's an atheist who is, was a radical feminist, and she can articulate this better than anyone I've ever heard. She's Oxford educated woman who is describing kind of the constant framing that women have faced in all of these topics is one of equality. But there's nothing equal about men and women. We're totally different. And so, yes, breast pumps allow women to become more man-like. That's true. Is that a good thing? Like, we have to ask that first. And in the political conversation, it's always assumed as a good thing from the beginning. And we're all about building family teams and really embracing this incredible opportunity to build families and be mothers and fathers. And so that equality framing, you can choose to make the number one framing, but that's your choice. And politics is always going to try to get you to force you to choose that as the number one framing, because it allows them to get loyal votes. And there's a movement that they have on the other side of that, that framing. But that is one framing for this topic, and not one I want to dominate this conversation. I just want to call it out and say, that's not the biggest deal. In our opinion, it may be, you may have been sort of conditioned in some ways to think about that as the primary way to think about this topic. But let's think about the infant. Let's think about the mother. Let's think about the family. Those are other framings that to us in most people's lives probably are more important than a political framing.
And think about the future, because what I think a lot is like, we're talking 6 months. We're talking 6 months of this infant's life. And, if you have multiple children, we have 5. And so I was in that cycle for about 10 years or so, where it was like, pregnant, nursing, weaning, pregnant, nursing, weaning kind of a, cycle. So it does end up being a lot more time than just 6 months, big picture wise. But there is so much life to live, years to have, if the Lord so chooses, for us to dive into other things. If we're taking a break from a job we enjoy or things like that. But there's also regrets, because I've also heard a lot of women wishing they would have known back when they still had the chance, that this was not like their career or even their job, even if it's not a career, they thought at the time was so important because they felt obligated to the situation that they were in. And we are afraid to embrace motherhood as a complete change in our life. Like, from now on, my life will be completely different. From now on, completely different. We want to keep our life the way it is and then kind of sprinkle motherhood on top of that.
Right.
And you just, I mean, you can, but it looks very different. And so if you are wanting to embrace what is motherhood, what is family, I'm coming at this from the standpoint of instead of individualism, as a family team. So what is best for the family? Everything from nutrition to bonding to long-term connection with my children. Those are all questions that, and then also, like, I'm asking, what is God's original design? And if there's a change in it, I should say, I needed technology in my births. I had to have all 5 C-sections. So I'm not someone who has never had to, things have gone super easy and have never had to consider technology. We've had to do that for the life of our children and for my life. But to press into that and to push past that and to, instead of just like embracing all things as equal, opportunities or equal things we should, enfold into our lives. Like, let's look at this one technology and say, what ways is it interrupting our family life? What ways is it interrupting? Now, I want to kind of just play out the scenario of a day. So if you have a newborn, they want to eat about, let's just say, this is on average, every 2.5 to 3 hours. And then you hope to get like a longer stretch at night within a few weeks where you're maybe going 4 hours or something. So you can see how you are constantly being needed. You are constantly being available for this baby at the expense of almost everything else at the beginning, because you're recovering from delivery. And
you just are advocating for this because this is what you want, right, April? This is your
yes.
personal desires.
I just love. Yeah. So it is clearly a self-sacrificial.
Yeah. This was not easy for April. Just that's
mode.
Point. Yeah.
Yes. And it is a thing where you are, I had mastitis many times.
Yes.
And I had to deal with that and fight through the pain. So once again, I'm not someone who's saying this comes totally easily, but we did build our life around it. The infant would come with us everywhere, come with me everywhere. So if it was date night for Jeremy and I, the baby's with us without even a thought. I have the baby in the car seat next to me in the booth at the restaurant, or we even took our babies into movies. And because I knew if the baby started crying, I could just nurse them and they would, fall back to sleep or whatever. So there was just this understanding of having the baby with me all the time for the first 6 months. Right. And when that first feeding, you start doing introducing the cereal or the baby food, and that replaces one of the feedings, then it starts that early. The separation, them depending on someone else. It's like, it starts at 6 months. And so I'm just asking the bigger question, like, why can't you devote 6 months to, or why can't we, like, let's press into
Why can't that be the default, you're saying?
Yes. Why isn't that the default of the beginning stages of having a baby?
And if that was, then everyone would ask the question, do I need a breast pump? As opposed to, default, put it on the registry.
Exactly. Or like, can I borrow your breast pump because, I got food poisoning and I need to pump and dump or whatever. There are things that come up, and like, you have to take a medication that the baby can't take. So you have to pump and dump for 2 weeks or something like that. Like there are situations that do come up, but it's like, those are the exceptions. Let's talk about the day-to-day of like the healthy, situation. And so, yeah, grandma, grandpa, I can't leave the baby with you for longer than an hour for the first 6 months because they're going to need me, but I would love to like do my grocery shopping real quick or something. If you want to really help out, I'll leave the baby with you for an hour and come back or something, So, so you're building your life around your infant's schedule, and that can be so offensive.
Right. Because it's unequal. It's asking enormous amounts of it, but I think one of the things, and I say the same thing to dads. A lot of times, I have this conversation with fathers, and they say, what do I do with an infant? They're like, I just, I'm waiting for it to become almost like 2 or 3 where, you can push a ball back, or, it can become kind of a playmate for me. And that's when I'm going to embrace, I'm going to start interacting with my child. But right now as an infant, I don't know what to do, because he or she needs its mother so much, and I'm not feeding them, especially if they're not pumping and giving bottles to the dad, which I think, again, I think that's part of maybe where people are coming from. They're like, we want this all to be equal. Part of the real sacrifice that you're describing forces the mother to wake up for every single feeding.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just like that's such, there's, sleep deprivation that creates, and it creates a separation sometimes between the husband and wife, because one has such an outsized role. They didn't just get pregnant, give birth, but now they're doing all the feedings for 6 months. But what I tell dads is always like, look, what the most important thing is happening the first 6 months is you're becoming a father. It's not what's happening to the infant. The infant may, get a certain amount of comfort from you holding the baby, and I think you should embrace that. But really what's happening is this is a difficult transition, and you're embracing being a dad. And this is even more intense for mothers. It's much more visceral. It's much more potentially painful. There's so much more that goes into it. And so the breast pump, creates a little bit more, alleviates some of that suffering, alleviates some of that intensity, alleviates a lot of, creates a little bit more of an equal situation, all of which you then have to take a step back and say, okay, do we have the wisdom to know that that's better? I think that's kind of where you're landing on this, is like, all of those values to us sound better. Like they sound like, wow, more flexibility, more freedom, less pain, more potential partnering. That's better. It's like, you convinced me, like checked all those boxes, and breast pumps are a good idea. And so I think, April, you're saying, look, we're not really calculating the other side of this equation. This is just the constant problem with technologies, is that it's very difficult to calculate the other side. So maybe just in closing, if somebody's listening to this, April, and saying, okay, I don't like what you're saying. Like, this is really hard to hear, especially talking about just sort of embracing the transition. But I'm starting to wonder if that's a good idea. Those, of course, the people we really want to, like, we have a huge heart for.
Yes.
And so, yeah, any last words to that mom who's listening to this?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, you can do it. And second of all, that becomes your problem solving mode. Then you start asking different questions. Like, okay, if I'm going to be getting up with the baby every 3 hours, I should maybe want to learn sleep training, or I'm going to need to learn how to like allow for others to help me with other things in the house, because this is going to be a hard 6 months. Or I need to learn how to connect with my husband in a way that makes us both feel connected, if this is the way it's going to be, and we both understand that this is a time period, and it's a season. Like, know that breastfeeding a baby is a season. I did it for a really long time. I mean, I breastfed my kids for like a year and under total, but that was like a 10-year, like the whole cycle I was referring to. But now I haven't breastfed a baby for a good, 12 years. So it is a season. It does end. And I think a lot of times we get really caught up in this is going to be the rest of my life. Oh my word, I'm exhausted every 3 hours. I can't. So you kind of learn how to, then you're going to, once you have more than one kid, you're going to be, what do I do with my other kids while I'm nursing the baby? So it gives you new questions to ask, but there are ways to deal with those questions. But allow yourself to ask them, play out the scenario. Okay, if I was nursing this way, what would I do differently about these different things that would then become a way of life? It's a way of life. It's part of a way of life. And so allow yourself to ask those questions.
That's so good. Yeah, I think what that reminds me of too is that when new technologies come in, it creates a generational separation as well, which basically means that your mother, who might have not had access to that technology or that default idea, is going to have less to say. And all, like a lot of the things you're saying about the dependence that it creates is good dependence. And so we live in this really weird culture where it's almost cultureless. Technology is shaping our culture and sort of separating generations constantly. And so I think, April, as you're thinking about this, you have like this, you're going to set a motherhood culture for our multi-generational family. So for these 4 daughters that we have, and potentially a daughter-in-law, and what are we doing in that situation to try to really, say what is our culture, and maybe that should be the default, right? And we don't Americans, we don't have a food culture. Just every technology comes along and just, we get swept up, and obesity is an epidemic. Like we are a cultureless society that is at the whims of capitalism and technology and changes. And I think that what really stands in the face of that, what should stand up to that, are unique family cultures. And people are like, no, I don't want anything to shape my complete freedom of opinion. And that creates lots and lots of disconnects and lots of problems. So I really like this. I hope this stirred up like just thoughts for people. Feel free to disagree with us. Like it's okay to disagree. Like it's okay to say, no, we don't like that. We're going to go a different direction on this topic. Doesn't mean that you're not building a family team. Doesn't mean you're not an awesome mom. But these are things we just want to start these conversations, as people who are really just wrestling. And I just want you guys to have, some of the benefits of, those of us who are a little older and have a little bit more decades to sort of look at technology in particular, and look at this. I'm a huge fan of Andy Crouch's new book about this. It's called The Life We're Looking For. Mm. He also, wrote The Tech Wise Family, but he actually in that book, he's asking all the questions we just sort of laid out about technologies and how you have to look at the other side of the technology. So sweet. Well, thanks, April, for doing this combo with me today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.